This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 18th of July 2023 at home in Wicklow, and it is an episode dedicated to the idea of orientation and bearings, landmarks, the things, the people, the beliefs that help us position ourselves in life, in the world, that help us position ourselves within ourselves. And I was inspired by my cat that has dementia and a particular incident that played out in #blessed where I live and where I record the podcast, and just got me thinking about the struggle to keep our heads, the struggle to keep our faith when the things that are familiar to us start falling away and start falling apart. So that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. It's philosophical, it's psychological, it's spiritual, it's emotional. It is what it is. And in the mix, I cite some people, like the writer Ivo Andric, like the psychologist Erich Fromm, like the actress and activist and trade unionist Fran Drescher. I'm sure there's somebody else I refer to. Oh, I also discuss High Noon. Isn't it Fred Zinnemann who directed that in the 50s with Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly? A young Lloyd Bridges is in there also. No, Lloyd. Yes, Lloyd. Yeah, the father, not the brother. So that's in there. That's in there in the mix as well. And I'm discussing High Noon as a sort of a depression, a depression or anxiety metaphor. So you can see what you make of that when you get to it. Okay, that's what's coming up. I hope you enjoyed what you hear. I will see you around the corner. Cheers.
Oh, not gonna change my mind. Leaving the dream behind. Keep my emoji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. You're very welcome indeed. I'm glad you've chosen to spend some time here with me, and I hope you're going to enjoy the little journey that we're about to embark upon. Now, what's on the agenda? I'm not entirely sure, but it has something to do with orientation. And I don't think I mean sexual orientation, although I may be able to. I could make that connection, should I wish. It's not irrelevant. It's not germane to the conversation. But I'm probably thinking more, as is so often the case here on The Clear Out, I'm thinking in more existential terms. I remember, and this, I'm about to reveal that this is a recurring theme in my thinking and in my public offerings and in my public reflections. About 10 and a half years ago, when I started theclearout.com, my blog, where I wrote short essays, think pieces, personal testimony about, broadly speaking, emotional and psychological well-being. The first piece I wrote was titled "How Did I Get Here?" And ultimately it was an essay about orientation, about where you find yourself at any given moment in life and what brought you to that place and how you feel about it or what you think about it. And the conclusion in that piece, which represents my which represents a sort of a personal philosophy that I haven't ever strayed too far from, is ultimately be accepting of yourself at any given moment in time. Forgive yourself for your perceived failures, and don't ask too much of yourself at a given time. And I suppose the extrapolation of that thinking is, it ends up being a sort of a pin to mediocrity. And I mean, I always laugh when I say that, because it does, at first glance, it makes me sound pathologically unambitious and almost apathetic. And I don't believe that is the case. And I hope, if you've spent some time here before, that isn't the conclusion you've come to. I mean, first and foremost, I mean, it takes more than apathy to produce this effort, this podcast once a week, as I have done for the last couple of years. It does take a certain amount of discipline and application and energetic negotiation, and it requires the cultivation of a certain muscle, which is both creative, reflective, intellectual, emotional, communicative, obviously. So in any case, this idea of, when I say mediocrity has a very negative connotation. You hear that word, mediocre. It's a bit nothing. It's not one thing nor the other. It's something very indistinguishable and bland and beige, to use a popular word in that area. But I suppose when I talk about mediocrity, I think what I'm trying to articulate is that sense of, it's okay just to be who you are, where you are, to be what you are. You don't have to be tethered to a shooting star or a rocket or something stratospheric. You can be completely okay and content doing the best you can at any given time, and to be, as I say, to be accepting of where you've landed, of where you've arrived, and to accept that circumstances and choices and a lot of things you can't control have brought you to the place you find yourself now. And I mean, I think that's ultimately what I'm probably going to end up poking around today, is this again, the desire for order and control, which presents us with this illusion of power and agency and stability, and sort of authorship of our lives and of our story, I suppose. I mean, I see that word story getting bandied around. I've seen it bandied around in certain movies. The Greatest Showman comes to mind. And again, I also come across the sudden ubiquity of the word storyteller. So anyone who's working in the arts or theatre making, movie making, suddenly they're referring to themselves as storytellers. It's a little bit of it's a bit nebulous. I'm not sure about the accuracy. I think it's just an idea or a concept that's become trendy and people really like it. And like a lot of things, like language vomits itself up when suddenly it gains a certain cachet in popular culture. And wellness speak and wellness language is very much like that. I mean, lots of people you'll hear talking about holding the space, that kind of thing. Jonah Hill has found himself in very hot water. The actor Jonah Hill has found himself in very hot water in the last couple of weeks because an ex-girlfriend published some texts that he had sent her that portrayed him in a very poor light, I suppose, because fundamentally they made him sound extremely controlling. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's. I mean, you could probably extrapolate more if you wanted to depict him as being chauvinistic or sexist, because there did feel like an old school, unreconstructed male thinking around it, not wanting his woman to be with other men and to be, think about how she's presenting herself to the world. And people went to town on him because he was presenting it kind of couched in therapy terms, therapeutic language, talking about boundaries and things like that. And it's become a bit of a lightning rod. It's a story that's been bumped around quite a bit over the last week or two, discussing the kind of ubiquity of this language and how it becomes meaningless in the mouths of those who are not professional. But that language has entered the lexicon, and I don't know what can you do? This is what language does. And like anything that is overused or used in a conflated way, or used in a way to, rather with true intentionality, but more as a means of signalling status, or perhaps signalling power, or being used to attack or to defend or to manipulate or to mislead or misguide, deflect, then these terms, in whatever context, they can become quite meaningless. And they just become cliches. And a cliche, typically has a kernel of truth, something that we all recognize, but when it's overused, it loses its impact. And I think the loss always with these things is authenticity, and you lose that palpable sense of this is real. And I think, and no offense to Jonah Hill, I don't know the guy at all. I've admired his acting in quite a few movies. He's kind of done a very good job of transforming himself from kind of a smart-ass comic actor to very credible dramatic actor. And he also put out a nice documentary earlier this year or late last year about his therapist, called UTZ. Isn't that it? UTZ. Was that right? UTZ? Which was sort of a portrait biopic of his therapist, and also a bit of a revelation about his own therapy journey. And I thought it was quite interesting, and I thought his therapist was interesting, and I didn't have any particularly strong sense that Jonah Hill had gone past the need for more therapy. I felt he was very enthusiastic about the process he'd been exposed to, and really very enthusiastic about the therapist in question. But he seemed like a very what? I mean, I'm not saying this with any sort of disparagement or nastiness or snark, but I just felt I was still looking at a young man with quite a lot of work to do on himself, because there was something about the way he was presenting himself and presenting his, the process he'd been through, that was a bit jazz hands. It was a bit like, hey, look at this, let me distract you from my real wound or my real pain or my real trauma or brokenness or whatever by telling you how amazing this therapist is. And I think it was still, worth watching. But yeah, I just found myself kind of going, okay, Jonah's a lot more work to do. But I was going to say regarding those texts, I mean, there's a couple of things. His ex-girlfriend, I think, is a surfer. I mean, I heard one podcast talk about it. I was listening to the guys on Higher Learning talk about it, and I read one or two articles about it, making this point about the misuse or misunderstanding or wrong-headed deployment of the language of therapy, or the misguided deployment of that language. But I did kind of find myself thinking, well, okay, this is just another Hollywood celebrity, and when we start looking at Hollywood celebrities to sort of guide us, we're in trouble, because they're living in, well, La La Land. It's just a crazy world out there, isn't it? Is there anything that's giving you the impression that that's not the case, and people just fall into the vortex? And yeah, I mean, let them on. And I admire a lot of people. I mean, as you know, if you're a regular listener, I'm a huge fan of movies, and I've been a great consumer of Hollywood product over my lifetime, and every generation of actors that have come out of there, I've been a fan of different ones. But there have been very few among them that I've thought, I need to listen to this person to make decisions about my life, or I need to look at that person as the barometer of our times. No, I mean, you're talking about people who are living in a bubble, and they are quite crazy. And I shouldn't say crazy. I mean, I've spoken about this before. Using crazy in that kind of generic way is a bit irresponsible. But I think, was it last week or the week before, I was talking about kind of a distortion. Last when I was talking about the RTE money scandal that's been playing out here over the last few weeks. And I was talking about distorted perceptions and distorted expectations and a distorted sense of entitlement. I think that's, I think it's safe to say that that's sort of prevalent in Hollywood circles. If you're someone who's pretty close to the top of the tree and very current, there's a distortion. And often the actors who seem to retain their sanity and their perspective have stepped away or never really stepped in. My good friend Harrison Ford comes to mind. Although, would you believe, I was talking to someone very recently, and that person may be listening to this episode of the podcast, and she revealed that she wasn't a Harrison Ford fan, that he kind of irritated her or bothered her, and I was horrified. I've never come across that. I mean, I understand people who go, Harrison Ford, not that interesting, especially when you're looking at a lot of his work from the 90s on. It wasn't the richest time of his career, and it got progressively less interesting as he went on. But I've never heard anyone express a real active dislike for him. Because I was talking to this person about last week's episode, the Richard Gere episode, and this person was saying, well, I kind of felt that way about Harrison Ford. And I was like, what? Sacrilege. Okay, so look, maybe that gives me an opportunity to move on to the topic in hand. And I said orientation. Now, where has this come from? Well, primarily it came from pissy Lego. I'll say that again. Pissy Lego. That's right. So, earlier today, I was passing through one of the rooms in the house, and I just found myself going, sniff, sniff. What's that smell? Couldn't see anything around that seemed dodgy. And I kind of was, okay, no, don't know what that is. I have to move on. And later on today, my daughter had one of her friends here, and they were playing. And I came back into the room, and they were just playing. It was the TV room, living room, and I was like, that smell. And my daughter was like, yeah, I can smell it too. And I was like, no, I'm going to find what that is now. And I got down on my hands and knees, and I was kind of just sniffing around. And the guys had pulled out a container of Lego that had been just up against the wall. And I was like, oh my God, this Lego stinks. And I just sort of tipped the container slightly, and I could see a pool, yellow liquid pooling at the bottom of the container. And I was like, this Lego has pee in it. And I looked over at the culprit, and it's our ancient cat, Marlon, the head of marketing. And Marlon is having a tricky spell at the moment. Our cat is 21 years old. That's 21 human years. And she was at the vet at the end of last week for some emergency treatment for a bladder infection, and her kidneys are giving her grief, and she had to get shots and medicine, and she had a rough few days over the weekend, and she was a bit all over the place and was doing some irregular toileting. Something I hope I won't be accused of anytime soon. But this was a case of some more of this irregular toileting, and she'd obviously gone, that's a container, it's like a very small, very colourful kitty litter, I'll just plonk my butt in here and let rip. And she did. And so look, I took the Lego, I washed it all basically and got rid of everything, and that's fine, and that was the source of the smell. And just a note on Lego, if you're a US listener, you might be, I've always been interested in this kind of variance in the how Lego is used in US English versus Irish English or British English. So in Ireland, England, Lego is an uncountable noun. We don't pluralize it. So it's Lego, like rain, like water, like bread, like money. We don't say, I'll have 3 breads. There were 7 rains today. We just say rain. There was a lot of rain today. And Lego is the same. But I've noticed in America, in the US, it's always referred to as Legos, my Legos, and it's pluralized. And that sounds as weird to me as Lego probably sounds weird to a US listener. But there you go, just a little language point. So anyway, pissy Lego. So the pissy Lego got me thinking about poor old Marlon the cat. And I was thinking about Marlon, who is probably quite deaf at this stage. My wife claims that she has dementia. That Marlon has dementia, not my wife. She's arthritic, but apart from that, she's doing pretty well. She's not incontinent, but I was just looking at her there as she slept face down on the couch, and I was just thinking about this idea of orientation and losing your bearings and not being sure where you are. And I was looking at her going, she's sound asleep and seems to be perfectly content. And I was just speculating on her thought processes and how much anxiety she had around not finding her regular kitty litter. And I was wondering if it had stressed her out not being able to find it, but then finding the Lego kitty litter, so to speak, and using that instead. And I mean, again, you're thinking it's kind of brilliant that the cat still got all her pee into that container. There was no pee on the floor. And she probably thought, well, I've done very well actually, because I've put my urine in a safe place and now I'm going to sleep for 5 hours. But it just got me thinking about the idea of our relationship to the world around us, and also our relationship to abstract ideas and concepts and understandings. Because I continue to believe that humans are fundamentally extremely relational, and it's not just interpersonal relationships. I think we relate to almost every aspect of our lives. It's a relationship, and even how we think about the past, the present, and the future, that's a relationship. And how we travel amongst the people in our lives and the institutions in our lives, how we travel with ourselves, how we travel with our baggage from the past, with our hopes and aspirations, our beliefs about the possibilities that lay ahead in the future. It's all relational, and how we think about love, how we think about spirituality, how we think about faith, how we think about death, how we think about desire, how we think about vocation, how we think about innumerable things. It's all relational, and it positions us. It positions us in our own shoes. It positions us in our lives, because those relationships dictate our responses, and our responses dictate our choices and our actions, and they inform our agency, because it's based on those positions and those responses and those actions and those things. That's how we come to our decisive path-finding choices. And And so what I find myself thinking about when I was thinking about Marlon, the cat, getting old, dementia, toilet issues, and then I'm thinking about my parents also getting old. My father has early stages of dementia. He may have some toilet issues himself. My mother hasn't been in great health recently either. And there have been some family losses in the last 8 or 9 months. So it's a changing world. I'm living in a changing world. I'm looking at myself, and when you start seeing people fade away, and you start losing people in your life, there's a consequent loss of bearings, because people in their own way can be institutional, and particularly if you talk about parents or significant family members, partners, loved ones, whatever it might be. I think they are reference points. They are landmarks, and we understand ourselves in relation to them because they occupy a certain space or a certain position in our lives, in our world. And I think that they inform our interiority immensely, for better or worse. And that's, that informing is something that we have to negotiate to a greater or lesser degree at different times in our lives, depending on what we're going through ourselves. And I think one reason that I continually lean into this kind of ongoing exercise in internal excavation and reflection and orientation is because I feel in my experience in my life that there's always more. There's always more to be learned. There's always another vein to be mined, and it's not in a sort of a solipsistic, narcissistic, navel-gazing way, although that can happen, of course. I think we're all capable of that at different times. I just think if you're listening, if you're attuned to the changes in understanding, that revelations are constantly there waiting to happen. And I suppose I think that the value in the personal mining and the personal excavation is that you're better prepared. You're better prepared to deal with that stuff, and better prepared to deal with the, oh shit, that's what's going on now. This is this new iteration of me that doesn't seem to be coping very well with things, or that's losing its mind, or that's full of anger or cynicism or despair, hopelessness. And I associate those feelings often with a loss of orientation. And I think when big changes happen in the world, in your world, but it can be the world as well as your world, when big changes happen, it's extremely threatening. It's extremely destabilizing. And it takes a very conscious effort to retain one's faith and to keep to keep the ship aright, is how I'd think about it. To go, these are stormy seas. And I mean, I was swimming earlier today and it was pretty rough. Now, not crazy rough, but pretty rough. That's a distinction, okay? So it was pretty rough. Medium-sized waves, but they weren't coming in at a ferocious frequency. So I was kind of able to roll with them. And the temperature was very comfortable. But that's sort of, I think, that's the sort of the metaphor for life. That sometimes the sea gets extremely rough, and sometimes those waves are going to swallow you up, and you've got to hope you can, roll with it and get yourself back on the surface. It's never about beating the wave or beating the sea or the ocean, because that's simply not possible. It's a much greater element than you are, than I am, than we are. And so the challenge is, can I not panic and freak out? Can I not give in to the terror, or maybe the fury, or the sense of being victimized and helpless, and the sense of being pummeled by something far greater than I am? Can we ride it out and go, it's going to be okay? I've kind of got to give myself over to this for a while, but I'll be all right if I can stay calm, if I can manage my breathing, and if I can keep myself the right way up. And that's orientation, isn't it? So if I can go, that's where the sky is, that's where the seabed is, I need to be heading for the sky. Now, thankfully, I've never been in truly terrifying conditions. I've been in some big water and been thrown around and been swallowed up and spat out. But I think I could count on one hand the amount of times that's happened over the last 20 years or so, which is it's a little bit more than 20 years since I've been sort of regularly getting myself into the sea or the ocean or whatever. But well, as I say, I don't take on more than I can handle, and I try to use good judgment. I mean, I marvel at the huge water that surfers put themselves into. I do find that truly terrifying. Those enormous waves, they see them dropping down, or the tunnels, the tubes. I mean, that is big water. That is scary stuff. But obviously surfers, particularly surfers at a very high level, have an exceptional ability to sort of negotiate that kind of that kind of water, those kinds of conditions, and I take my hat off to them. I mean, if you take that idea of the pro surfer, negotiating huge water and doing something beautiful with it, which I think surfing at its best, that's what it looks like. It really is. It really is a thing of beauty. I'm not sure if that's is that the aspiration, when I'm trying to make that a metaphor for what life can do to us. I mean, the type of conditions I'm talking about, they're not specifically huge surfable waves. That something beautiful can be made out of. Although I'm sure you can find a poster somewhere in a dentist's office that might give you that impression. I think it's more, you probably won't feel particularly skillful or trained. You probably won't feel you're standing well on your surfboard. You probably won't have any true sense of your equilibrium. And you're probably more going to have a sense of being a sock in a washing machine. But the question is, can you excuse me, can you become a Zen sock? Can you be a Zen sock in lotus position? That's right. Can you just go, I am the sock and I will not beat this washing machine. I need to become one with the washing machine and embrace the turbulence. That was part of the subheading description of this podcast for a while. Welcome to the turbulence. But I changed my blurb recently. It's become a bit more succinct. But I do believe that is the fundamental essence of life, is turbulence. It's flux. My old friend Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher, that was his position. All life is flux. This river I stand in is not the river I step in. Is that it? Yeah. Constant movement, and there's a huge variety of the kind of movement. And I've spoken before about my relationship to the sea and swimming, and the pleasure of swimming in different conditions. And sometimes that's not pleasurable at all. Sometimes it's very challenging, and it's purely a psychological challenge. I mean, it's a physical challenge, but for me it's more psychological to go, I'm going to put myself in rough water and not freak out. I'm going to put myself in rough water and retain my sense of calm, which helps me regulate my breathing, which helps me have better control over my body, so I can focus on having an effective stroke and keep my bearings while I'm in the water and make sure I'm in safe distance of shore at all times. And there have been many times, and I mean, this winter was a great example. There were several times I drove down to the sea and it was just like, nah, I'm not getting into that. It's just too much. And mostly that was about the conditions, but once or twice it was just about my sense of resolve. My sense of mental and emotional strength was incapacitated, compromised, diminished, and I had to open the door to fear and self-doubt and just not having any appetite for the fight. And I mean, that's something that I've experienced in karate as well. Now, bear in mind, it's been a few years now, 3 or 4, since I've been training in a dojo with other karate practitioners. But over the years, sometimes the biggest hurdle when you have to get out on the floor and fight somebody, the biggest hurdle is just putting yourself into it with the right headspace. Because you can psych yourself out very easily. I definitely had times when I psyched myself out and didn't really bring my A game, or went in holding something back or thinking I could coast or cruise, and you always get caught out. And simply, the only reason I would choose to coast or cruise is because my heart wasn't in it. And you can't get away with that. But when you go in and you're fighting somebody who's good and you're going in wholehearted, now that doesn't mean you're going hard, but you're fully committed to being in it, and that can bring the presence of mind. And the presence of mind then can bring that sense of the sports cliche. Well, maybe it's not a cliche, I shouldn't undercut it, but of being in the zone where you enter a flow state, and you're suddenly on the other side of it, and you realise, oh, I pulled some moves out of the bag there that I hadn't really thought about. They just happen. Of course, they happen because you've done the training, they happen because you've put in the hours, and they happen because it's in there and something alchemical happens. And that's the equivalent of the surfer going down the tube. Or that sounds bad. I don't mean going down the tube, you know what I mean? Going along the tube, surfing that amazing wave that forms that beautiful aqua tunnel. I can just think of, video footage of that kind of thing and amazing photographs of that kind of thing. I always find it quite captivating. But yeah, like that idea then of, and I believe this is one of the great challenges of living well, or trying to live well, aspiring to live well. And I have spoken about this in previous podcasts more specifically, but this idea of bringing your full heart to proceedings. And I mean, we talk about mindfulness and being present, but can you bring your heart with you? That sense of, I am fully here with all parts of my being, and my beating, loving, life-embracing heart is at the centre of it, and it brings the mind, and I'm bringing the body, and I'm bringing the senses, and I am here. And I think in a way that's ironically where the mindfulness lies, in that attitude. Not so much I mean, that's how I feel about it. I mean, and it's less so the cool Zen mindfulness, which maybe is, brings a certain detachment, a certain meditative state, the witnessing state. I find if you go wholehearted into something and enter that flow state, which can be in so many different areas of your life, I think on the other side of it, you can realise I was a witness. And it's a sort of a recall of, oh yeah, I did that thing and I did it well and I was there. And when I express it in those terms, it may push your thinking in the direction of positive experiences, achieving particular tasks or enjoying certain events, and certainly that is part of it. But what I'm actually thinking about is, can you bring your whole heart into the more challenging areas of your life, where you may be feeling disenchanted, disenfranchised, shut out of your life. You may be experiencing grief. As I referred to earlier, you might be experiencing anger, sadness, because it's at those times I think we can feel very discombobulated and very removed from ourselves. And I know when I'm in that sort of state, and I've definitely had a few episodes of that recently, I find it extremely challenging. I find a lot of my typical reserves of kind of sang-froid and cool-headedness and accessible sort of positivity and resolve, they just they are nowhere to be seen. It's like every friend in the room vanishes. It's like Gary Cooper in High Noon, going from house to house, going from friend to friend, and kind of going, hey, little help? There's gunmen coming for me. They're coming today, this afternoon. They're going to try and kill me. Any chance you could give me a dig out? Any chance you could watch my back? And nobody does. And that's what it can be like. You're on your own. Now, Whether or not, the lonely gunslinger, whether or not that resonates with you. I mean, the High Noon it really is great. It's great stuff because he has the chance. He has the chance to go. That's the point. He has the chance to leave. He's just married the beautiful Grace Kelly, and they're getting away on their little carriage, and he knows, he gets word, they're coming for you. They're coming for you. Those bad men, that one particular bad man that you sent to jail, they're coming for you. But here, go now, leave with your beautiful bride. And he just can't bring himself to do it. And he has left, but he turns back and goes, no, I've got to face this. I've got to face this. Because someone else is going to pay. Someone else is going to pay if I don't face it. And this is about me. This is my relationship to these guys. This is my relationship to the action that I took. It's my relationship. Now, you might think, I don't know, you might say that's sort of there's a sense of destiny or something fatalistic. But I look at it and I see it from the sort of the warrior code, or a personal code, to go, this is the only honourable thing I can do. I have to face this thing that scares me. I have to face this thing that could kill me. Because who else is going to do it if not me? And if I don't face it, I've never faced it. Do you know what I mean when I say that? If I walk away, I never had that experience. I never stepped up to prove to myself I can do it. And that will haunt me forever. I'll always be looking over my shoulder. When will the spectre of that abdication of duty come back to get me? And on that note, I want to read you a quote, because I was thinking earlier, or maybe yesterday, I was thinking I was going to do this episode and I was going to kind of look at the idea of despair, probably prompted by some of these recent depressions that I've had, and that sense of profound hopelessness. It can be such an assault of blackness and negativity, and when I experience depression, it doesn't always have those characteristics, but sometimes the really spiky ones, they have a way of just stealing every bit of light out of your life. And I'm grateful that I've got better over the years. I'm not entirely freaking out and not entirely giving into catastrophic thinking. And it seems to just leave a door open for a quicker recovery, where I sort of rebalance and reset. But in any case, I was looking at sort of quotes around this idea of despair and hopelessness, and I came across a few sort of related ones that I thought were interesting. I might give you two here from the Yugoslavian author, now deceased, Ivo Andric, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. I think he was sort of at his peak in sort of the mid 20th century. But here's one of his quotes. There comes a time when a man finds himself in front of a dark, uncrossable abyss, which he himself has spent years digging. He cannot go forward and has no way back. Words have failed. Tears won't help. And who would he call out to? He can't even remember his own name. Then the man sees that on this God's green earth there is but one true suffering, the torment of guilty conscience. It's very dramatic, isn't it? I mean, it's very dramatic. It could be describing the experience of depression, the experience of despair, the experience of hopelessness. But I was particularly curious about the specificity of his conclusion that there is but one true suffering, the torment of guilty conscience. And when I was talking about Gary Cooper in High Noon before, and that idea of if he didn't turn back to face the bad men, he would have been haunted by that for the rest of his life. His sense of personal failure or cowardice, or allowing someone else to face the consequences of his actions, even if there was an injustice in those men coming for him, even though they were still bad men on the wrong side of the law and he was the righteous sheriff. I was just thinking about that in terms of, the guilty conscience. I should have. Why didn't I? I owed it to myself. I owed it to other people, perhaps. I owed it to the people of that town. How can I look at my young bride, my beautiful bride, and expect her to honour me and respect me and love me if I'm walking away from this fight? Now, it's a bit of an old school, maybe it's quite an alpha male position, but I think what's interesting about High Noon is that it's clear that Gary Cooper is scared. So in that regard, it's more complex, it's more nuanced, it's more interesting, and the cowardice and maybe the lack of gumption or moral fibre amongst many of the townspeople he turns to for help. I mean, that's part of the story as well. It's a bit of an indictment, and yet I don't know. Are we to judge them, or? And this is, again, why maybe Gary Cooper becomes, the hero of the piece, because he just takes it on the chin, because he's not judging people. He just he's just going to get on with it. But it's, he would definitely appreciate the help. Anyway, I originally went to High Noon in my mind because I was saying that the nature of the depression is you've got something difficult to fight and all your pals turn their back on you. Now, I do not literalize that in my own life. I'm blessed. I am blessed with great friends. I'm very, very lucky. I do not take my friendships for granted, and I've got some great in this area, actually, the area of dealing with depression occasionally, or personal kind of crises emotionally or whatever. I found my male friends have been enormously supportive and articulate, and they've been absolutely, brilliant. Now, here's another quote. From our friend Ivo. I liked this one as well. I saw this one first, actually. Between the fear that something would happen and the hope that still it wouldn't, there is much more space than one thinks. On that narrow, hard, bare and dark space, a lot of us spend their lives. I quite like that, because that to me evokes this tension between despair and hope, between pessimism and optimism, and this idea that we occupy the space in between, that we're neither, well, I shouldn't speak, I can't speak for everyone else. It's never stopped me before, but it's unusual for the average among us, the mean. It's unusual for us to spend all our time at one end or the other. I mean, those are extremes, but most of us hover somewhere in between this area of something bad will happen, some future dire possibility that I believe could be a reality in my life. There's that. And I have a relationship with that, and my fears and anxieties are very much in that area. And then there's this other belief of, yeah, but what if that doesn't happen, and there's this really positive outcome. And we have there's no true control. There's no true control over either of those outcomes. Both of those outcomes are possible. But we're living in the now of, this is the space that I occupy, and each day will push me one way or the other towards those possible outcomes. But I just can't, it's so impossible to truly predict anything, because there are so many unknowables. There are so many things that are out of my control. And I suppose, in a way, if you're striving for control or order or a sense of agency in your life, a sense of I can determine outcomes, I think a strategy, a method is to simplify things in your life, to simplify the amount of things you have to do, the amount of people you have to deal with, and set yourself very particular, achievable tasks that involve very few other people. And so that lends itself to becoming a hermit. I'm going to sit here and face my wall of CDs, and I'm going to count the CDs all day long, and I'm going to do it again and again and again, and it'll just be me, some space, the wall of CDs, and no other distractions. And maybe that's a road to happiness. Maybe that's a road to contentment. Maybe that will give you a sense of control. I don't know. There was someone else I was looking at as well. Eric Fromm's a psychologist, and I think he's described as a neo-Freudian, and some of his thinking chimes with me, I must say. And one of his ones that came out, again, I was just looking at kind of quotes in this area of kind of despair and hopelessness. I saw one that jumped out because it's something I've discussed before. And he said, "The quest for certainty blocks the search for meaning. Uncertainty is the very condition to impel man to unfold his powers," or presumably to impel woman to unfold her powers. I'm not sure if you agree with that if you're a female listener. But the quest for certainty blocks the search for meaning. Uncertainty is the very condition to impel man to unfold his powers. Well, uncertainty, if you cannot tolerate it, will drive you to quest for greater understanding. But if the search is for certainty, and I've probably discussed this and used the word certitude, and very closely follow that with the word dogma, I'm highly suspicious of building one's life and one's belief system around the idea of certitude or the idea of dogma, and using a belief system as a weapon with which to beat others. Often it's the foundation upon which bigotry thrives, and I distrust it intensely. In a very fundamental way, I do not trust it. So I thought that was quite a nice quote as well. Eric Fromm had some other nice stuff. He said that freedom was a fundamental part of human nature, and that the contradiction that humans face is that they must simultaneously seek for closeness and for independence. So embracing this idea of the social animal, but also embracing the idea of the desire to be independent and confidently, existentially unique and isolated, to strive for oneness with others and at the same time for the preservation of his uniqueness and particularity. And he says the answer to this paradox and to the moral problems of man is productiveness. So I don't know what you make of that. I mean, productiveness, that might sound like a very conservative conclusion, but I like it. I actually like it, and I've often found myself talking about myself. That's the end of that sentence. I've often found myself talking about myself. No, I've often found myself referring to my own sort of life juggle and talking to friends or family members about the things that I try to do. And I'm happiest when I'm being productive. I'm happiest when I'm producing things and creating things that are connected to the things I'm interested in and the things that I care about. And the podcast is the ongoing sort of exercise in that area, as well as these other things that I do. But that's one of the reasons I find it hasn't been that challenging to me to carve out this time once a week to do the podcast, because I get a huge amount out of it. To sit down and think in my seat and speak and share and explore particular thoughts or inklings or rumblings or whatever it might be. And I really agree with that sentiment from Erich Fromm, this idea of the importance of connectivity, living side by side with the imperative to be able to be alone. Because I think that is a really valuable pathway to self-preservation. And again, not in a selfish sense, but to keep a strong sense of one's self, which I think opens the door to individual critical thinking, and a sort of a confidence, not an arrogance, a confidence born of being comfortable with oneself and knowing oneself. And that is something that has to be cultivated, but it can make you, I'd like to think that it gives you the opportunity then to be far more comfortable with other people, because you may not feel the pressure to conform in an unthinking way, to participate without sacrificing your individuality, because otherwise I think you can become sort of iconoclastic and the sort of performative rebel outlaw kind of position, which I think is ultimately quite juvenile. I don't know. Anyway, okay. I'm jumping around a bit, but there, the through line is there. The through line is there. We're talking about orientation and the loss of our bearings, the loss of our landmarks, the loss of our touchstones, and how that can impact us very severely. And so, what can we come back to? What can we return to? You return to what you think you know. And that's not an accident. It's not an accident that I use that phrase. You return to what you think you know. Because if I say you return to what you know, that's a certitude. And I'm dubious about that. I'm skeptical about the certitude idea. But we return to what we think we know. So I think I do better if I can calm myself down, if I can get into my breath, get into my body, if I can reflect, if I can not speak until I know what I have to say, if I can move myself away from this energy or these people or whatever it might be, if I can make sure I'm doing the fundamentals of self-care, like making sure I'm sleeping well and eating well and exercising, making sure I'm not neglecting the things or the people that deserve my full attention, all of that kind of thing. You come back to the basics, come back to the things you believe work, the things that you believe keep you on the right path. And I'm going to give the rest of this episode to Fran Drescher. So, if you've been following the news in Hollywood, there has been a writers' strike for, I think, a couple of months now, maybe a bit more. And last weekend, the Actors Union, SAG-AFTRA, they decided they would strike as well, in solidarity. And mainly the strike is around the issue of streaming and AI and ownership of image and intellectual property and credit and royalties, and the studios and the big streaming services are on one side of this debate and everybody else is on the other. The writers, the actors, everyone who works in the industry from top to bottom, they're on the other side of this. And Fran Drescher is the head of SAG-AFTRA, I think is the name of their union, the Screen Actors Guild, and I think the other one is like television and writers. I'm not entirely sure. You can look it up, it's grand. Anyway, Fran Drescher was an actress who was particularly prominent in the 90s. She had a comedy series called The Nanny, which I think ran from 1993 to 1999. I never watched it. I was sort of aware of her as a figure from, American pop culture. But she was also, I think, in Saturday Night Fever back in 1977. So she must have been I think she was only 20 when she was in that, as one of the crew of kind of John Travolta's, pals and the girls around. But yeah, as I say, Fran Drescher is now the head of the Actors Union over in Hollywood, and she came out with a great speech at the weekend, at the end of last week. And fundamentally, she was saying she couldn't believe the position of the studios and the streaming giants, that they simply were completely out of touch with reality, that they didn't want to kind of budge an inch. And she was completely incensed by their intransigence and their arrogance. And she just came out and gave this great speech to the press to explain, that was it, that was the tipping point, and that there was no hesitation to go on strike, and it was about solidarity, and it was about sticking up for the people all the way down the bottom of the Hollywood pyramid. And it's well worth checking out. Just go and look it up, Fran Drescher Union Speech, or Fran Drescher Hollywood Speech, or Fran Drescher Actors Strike Speech, whatever. If you care about workers' rights, if you care about trade unionism, if you care about solidarity, you'll get something out of it. And she just spoke with really palpable passion and anger, and she was just very articulate and expressed herself really, really well. And I was talking to my cousin. How are you, Fionn, if you're listening? I was talking to my cousin about this the other day, and it just seems that this is another example, I think, of the current worldwide climate of these huge organizations and kind of superpowers in one aspect of life or another, who are flexing their muscles really hard. And I don't know if it's part of this very late iteration of superannuated capitalism, and it's the sort of the sense of it's always darkest before the dawn, because there's something that feels very unsustainable about the way the world is going, and the way so many normal people are getting left behind, with ever increasing wealth disparity, and economic disadvantage, and people just being shut out, and the people who are in the position of power just seeming to not care. Now, I don't know if it's if it's this kind of late, desperate, ugly cash grab. I don't know. So I'm not well enough informed, and I'm not an economist, and I don't have a sense of the future, but it just feels like everything is pitched into a very attritional state at the moment. And with this idea that I've been talking about in this episode of orientation, I just found myself thinking about Fran Drescher, going, I don't recognize what I'm facing. I don't recognize this absolute unwillingness to come to the table in a meaningful, respectful way. This horribly arrogant, dismissive position of the studios and the streaming services. And so her response was to orient herself back into the foundation of activism and strike action and solidarity, in an absolutely clear-eyed, unambiguous, unequivocal way. I thought it was brilliant. And I think that's ultimately what I'm talking about. The loss of orientation. When you find yourself all at sea, you've got to fight your way back and find the sky, find the land, orient yourself, and stay calm, stay resolute, and know that you're going to get to a safer place. That's it. That's all I've got. So, there you go. You'll have to decide if that all hung together. But yeah, really, that started with Pissy Lego. So I'm not sure you'll get it on any other podcast. But you got it here. Okay, thank you so much for listening. You can, as always, throw me some love on social media. You will find the relevant links or buttons or icons wherever you're listening to this. If you're so moved, so motivated, you can support this show financially through the Patreon link. That's patreon.com/theclearout. And I would welcome anything you could give. And don't worry about it if you can't. But spread the love. Share this if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment. Rate it. All of that kind of thing helps, and I'd be very grateful for any proactivity you could demonstrate. Okay, that's it until next time. Thanks again for listening. Go easy now. Just don't do any irregular toileting, and in general, just mind yourselves. All right, all the best. Take it easy. See ya.